Nancy, whenever you're ready.
Can you see the slide? Okay.
Yes,
great.
yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. And let me just say, by way of introduction, my talk is about 11 minutes, so it's very, very close. I'll keep it to that. So thank you very, very much for this invitation and for being part of a really fascinating colloquium on the digital and Augusto de Campos, something that interests me enormously. I became interested in Augusto de Campos's poem, Acaso, Chance, from 1963, during the course of corresponding with him about poems to include in my prospective anthology of concrete poetry. Entitled Concrete Poetry, a 21st Century Anthology, the volume will be published by Reaction Books in November of 2021. Acaso was a puzzle. Acaso was a puzzle, although I knew Augusto was generating permutations of his title word, I couldn't figure out how he arrived at 10 stanzas of 6 5-lettered lines each. Each stanza comprised a unique combination of lines. If you look at each stanza on the screen, there's no repetition, and the 6 lines per stanza were organized alphabetically. Augusto thus followed the factorial formula for permutation. That is, given 5 letters, S-O-C-A-A or Acaso, spelled as the vernacular word, given 5 letters with 2 repeats, that is the A, he mapped out the possibilities as follows: 5 times 4 times 3 times 1 equals 120, divided by 2, because the A repeats, equals 60. And indeed, if you look at the poem, there are 60 lines altogether. Acaso is thus a very differently conceived poem from what we often expect in Augusto's work. Unlike the poem Sem numero, without a number, from 1957, which I will discuss at the end of my talk, Acaso does not pursue the verbivoco-visual, nor does its typography and graphic design convey its content. Focusing on Acaso, this paper will address how it differs from emblematic poems such as Viva Vaia, Lujo Lijo, Poemobiles, Linguaviagem, poems which derive new words from permutations, select words based on sound, as well as the verbal and the visual, and limit their vocabulary to a minimal source of words and vocables. Acaso, by contrast, avoids any punning or new word formation. Why then did setting a poem to the word Acaso intrigue Augusto? Recalling his process in a letter to me, he wrote, quote, "I tried to compose an iconic text only with its anagrams." An anagram meaning a word or phrase formed by rearranging the letters of another word. Quote, "I finally decided to align all the anagrams of Acaso in alphabetical order, and then reverse that order so that the word Acaso did not appear in the second stanza," end quote. Looking at this, looking at the poem in this slide, you can see that Augusto is organizing the anagrams alphabetically. And here are what I would say the source, the stanza source of the anagrams for stanza 1. So he's organizing them alphabetically, then reversing the order of each line, beginning with stanza 1, and then stanzas 2, and so forth. So here, moving to stanza 2, you see this, what I call the source material, the original material, all anagrams of Acaso organized, if you look carefully from top to bottom, alphabetically, and then reversed in order or read from right to left, so that what we end up with is what you see on the screen as the second stanza. Quote, luckily, Augusto explained to me, the anagrammatic vocables did not form any vernacular word, only suggesting the word caos, which gives a hint of chaos in English, but this is not the Portuguese word, and the word caos for chaos in Acaso, which means no chaos. So we have the word caos, and then due to the use of every possible permutation of the letters Acaso, the word that it spells has to appear once in the poem and does so in the 8th stanza. And you see there, I've bracketed it as it appears there. It has to appear at that one point. Acaso and chaos or caos are thus the only legible words. All the rest are non-signifying anagrams. Another point worth making is the idea of instant communication, which Odile Cisneros explains in her recent article on Augusto's Outro. However, rather than eliciting instant communication, and this is how Cisneros defines concrete poetry, Augusto's intention in Acaso is to make it difficult for the reader to discover the title word among its 60 anagrams. As he recounted to me, quote, I wanted to make the deciphering more difficult, to increase the timing, give a breath to the reading. And for this purpose, I had the idea of inverting the order of the anagrams, end quote. The result is a text we cannot read, nor can one read it aloud. And this is unusual for Augusto. As you know, his poems are often performative. Think of Poeta Menos, Cidade, Tensal, O Pulsar, SOS, Posturo, Rever. Does our inability to read the poem insert its own form of chaos? Possibly, yes. Augusto created an English version of Acaso, which you see at the bottom of the text here, using the word event and subjecting it to permutations, which result in 59 anagrams and one appearance, also in stanza 8, of the title word, event, in the second line. The juxtaposition of Acaso above, the poem at the top, and event below, as Augusto intended, and as we see here, enhances the spatial dimension of each poem, the spatial look of each poem. Why did Augusto choose the word event? Like Acaso, it's 5 letters with 2 repeated, in this case E. What would have happened if he chose chance? It wouldn't have followed that pattern, hence event. Acaso caught the attention of the British poet and visual artist John Furnivall. In number 2 of his openings, and this is Furnivall's name for his small press disseminating concrete and visual poetry, he produced this foldout, and I think it's striking in the way it enhances and highlights the optical qualities of Acaso. As we study Augusto's poem more closely, we are struck by the contrast between the principle of chance and Augusto's rigorous procedure for releasing the anagrams so as to avoid legibility and repetition. The inspiration of John Cage's famous piano composition, Music of Changes, from 1951, his first to utilize chance operations in composing a work, is significant for Augusto. Cage's instructions call for negating the self, that is, distancing the self from choice and introducing chance by tossing 3 coins twice, obtaining a number, finding its corresponding hexagram in the I Ching Book of Changes, and looking up the matching cell in one of Cage's 3 charts: sounds, durations, dynamics. In Cage's terminology, chance refers to the use of some sort of random procedure in the act of composition. The permutation and ordering in Augusto's Acaso is generated deterministically, as we've seen, rather than randomly from 5 letters. Since the ordering principle is sufficiently complicated, as you look at Acaso again, the structure is not immediately apparent, the formulation from left to right, right to left, and so forth. Yet, for both Cage and Augusto, the rules of chance operations meet with choice. Namely, for Augusto, looking again at this poem, the arrangement of the text blocks on the white page, the tension between linear and spatial readings of the stanzas, the black on white. A poem that predates Acaso and offers an interesting contrast is Sem Número. And here we see a screen print from 1957. This poem is characterized by its use of wordplay, that is, permutations and transformations. Although we would not immediately recognize the verbivoco-visual component, as we would in Lija or Cidade, it is an active practice, as I'll explain briefly. In the opening line, 3 different words form a phrase, sem número. They generate all subsequent words and sounds in the poem, as well as a 4th word, 0. The result is a minimal reduced language, and I would call this the verbal dimension of this poem. As part of this reduction, sem número dramatizes the central status of o, which is Portuguese for the word the, but visually the number 0. After breaking his phrase down to 0, and you see this happen visually, Augusto then builds back up also visually, so that each of the subsequent vocables has meaning. Nu, naked, mero, mere, genuine, sem número, without number. And these are visual dimensions, verbi, voco, visual. Coming to the voco, graphic, one more comment on the graphic, you see the circles of space, semicircles on either side of the poem that create the idea of zeros or circles and add to this notion of form and content. And finally, sonically and phonically, we hear the repetition of the ending ero with its o, and the repetition of rhyming with num. And this is the vocal dimension. And I realize I meant to check the box for sound. I don't know how well you'll be able to hear this, but this is Augusto reading this poem, Sem número. I hope you hear it at least somewhat.
Sem número, 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 0, o, nu, número, mero, número, número, sem número.
Unlike Acaso, sem número benefits from live reading, aligns form with content, invokes the verbivoco-visual, and thus, considered along with the very different Acaso, reveals the remarkable range of Augusto's work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy.